Sairam, thank you, everyone. I've been to the Hollywood Center a number of times in the past, and I've always sort of connected with the hospitality and people that I've known from the past. And so, hooray for Hollywood, as they say. So I also have a connection to the Hollywood Center when it, back to the early 70s, more than 45 years ago, when it was on Sunset Strip. And Dick and Janet Bach had it. It was this old Tudor house right on the strip there. And myself and several of the other people that had spent a year or more with Swami were sort of congregating there. And I lived there for a little while with Howard Levin and also Landon Carter, who had taught business at Swami's college. And I particularly remember one time we were looking out the front door. It was early morning, Howard and I, and he was looking, and there was a prostitute standing on the street right in front of the center. And he's explaining it to me. He says, "See, it's like this. We're here in the center, but we're looking out at the prostitute, and the prostitute is out there in the street, and she's looking at the center. Guess who it works out best for when lifetime ends?" So it's what we keep our consciousness on that's really most important. And I wanted to say, just to add about this, about questions, feel free to interrupt with a question, because actually I do best when if people want to hear some particular aspect and some question pops in mind, I'd be happy to work with that. I'm kind of interested, we're in an unusual place in history and in technology where we're sort of fumbling around, in which we are in each other's life in a sort of a video and audio way that we're not really used to. And I'm no Zoom star or tech hero, that's for sure. But I don't really know what to make of it. I was thinking earlier today about a spiritual philosopher named Martin Buber from the 1950s. He's a well-known Jewish mystic, and he wrote a very famous book called I and Thou. And the idea was that we have relationships with God, that's I and Thou. And we can have relationships to anything, like even Zoom, as I and Thou. But mostly in life, we have a relationship that might be called I and it. They're just things around us. Everywhere there are things. And even Zoom is a thing. It's a miracle, but after 100 Zoom meetings, we're like, hey, it's another thing. And so it's, how can we get around that, get back to that I and Thou? We're really there with it. And obviously with Swami's words, Swami's stories, that pulls us in. And there's so powerful that it can transcend the fact that we're only partially here. We're not here in the flesh and blood, but we're here in spirit. And I like this version of the Gita, which makes me think of Swami, and I'd like to share this. And I think it applies to our situation. And this goes, "You find yourself in this transient, joyless world. Turn from it and take your delight in me. I am the birth of the cosmos, its dissolution also. I am he who causes all. Upon me, these worlds are like pearls on a thread. I am the essence of the waters, the sacred smell of the earth. It is I who resound in the ether, the word that is God. The entire universe is pervaded by me in that eternal form beyond the senses. Thickly veiled by my divine Maya, I am not revealed to all. This deluded world knows me not as the unborn and eternal." So I think that's our situation. And Krishna has spoken to us, Swami has spoken to us, and it's very, very similar, very much the same, it's the same person, the same Purusha. So I was also thinking about our situation now, the unusual part about lockdown, and how we're sort of separated in a way from our usual interaction with people. And it made me think about the sort of intimate and quiet times with Sathya Sai. And in particular, in summer of 1984, it was a big political upheaval in southern India. And there were riots, and some people died, and the streets and the roads were really impassable because people were attacking cars and things like that. So the ashram is the only time I've seen where all of the gates were all locked. And if you were inside, it was August of 1984, and you were inside with Swami. You were just there with Swami. And it was a very special time in which he gave the lectures about the Bhagavad Gita, which Al Drucker put together in a Gita book, which is available. And I think Mike Congleton told me that that was the first time he was ever there in India. But there was something very, very sweet about it because there were very few people, and it was just you with Swami. And that's really our situation. We're at home, I suppose, and we're there with Swami. We're not there so much with other people. We don't have the distractions or the whatever it is that keeps our mind occupied. And so we're in a slightly different situation. I like to think of it as monastery at home, maybe forced monastery at home. And it has its benefits. There are obviously terrible things associated with this pandemic, the terrible loss of life and loss of, for people around the world, there are terrible things in terms of starvation and things like that that are accompany this. So it's not fun and games by any means, but there is something that we can take from it. This is our intimate time with Swami. This is a gift to us in a sense of trying to work with ourselves alone with Swami. I know some people may be quarantined with, many, many people, and that's of course extremely challenging, as Swami would call it, adjustment sadhana. But for those of us that are, there's a sort of an empty house or empty apartment or an empty studio, whatever it is, this is our time to be with Swami. And there was a devotee in St. Louis who was, he was the regional president for some point, and he was dying from cancer. And people asked him how he was doing. He said, just there hanging out with Swami, just he and Swami were just there being together. And that's, I found very, very powerful. And I think that this is something to keep in mind. So some of the other intimate moments remembering Swami, one was, some of you that remember in the 1990s, maybe the early 2000s, when he had this electric car, and the electric car would go up on the veranda and it would get into all of these unusual spots that no one could possibly drive to. And Swami would be directing the driver, and he would navigate through all of these sitting people. And every once in a while he would open his window and people would try and give him letters and things like that. And so it was kind of, some people used to call it karshan. And the car would come by and you'd be there. And one time I had a chance, someone else was presenting this big presentation, big book. And the window opened and the fellow was presenting, and he put all of his material inside, and there was just enough space for me to get my head in and my little letter. And all of a sudden we're in this little space about less than 5 feet square, in which there's Swami and two other people. Right within a few inches of my hands and head was the driver. And the driver was, just as they talk in Krishna, the charioteer, he was there perfectly empty. He was like just looking straight forward, didn't look left, didn't look right. He was only focused on whatever instruction came from Swami, and the instructions they weren't audible. They were sort of like little finger signs or just a flick of an eyebrow or whatever. So he was just totally focused on Swami. Meanwhile, we're inside the car now. And so there's this outer world in which you're looking at Swami through the window and having this intensity. And suddenly you go a layer deeper and you're right in there in the car. And suddenly the whole vibration, the whole feeling, the intensity of it, and the loveliness of it, and the sweetness of it. It was sort of like going from, being out in the darshan area and being in the interview room. It was like just going, just at that moment, just through that window, suddenly you saw a window into a whole different world. And so it's one of my favorite memories. Another like that, being close with Swami and in a sort of a tight space, was taking a plane ride once with him to Mumbai. And there was something so special about it. Of course, he gets on first and he's in the very first row and everyone's sort of trying to get in rows close to him. And in those days, you could find out when he was going on the plane because you could call Air India and ask when Mr. SS Baba was flying. And if they said yes, you said, okay, buy me a ticket on that. And it was a very beautiful time. He didn't do anything in particular. As a matter of fact, we sent him a note and he ignored it. But at a certain point, the plane was buffeted by turbulence. And so normally you're on a plane and it's buffeted by turbulence and you think, oh, I hope it's nothing bad, or gee, this could be bad. But in this case, you know that the Lord of the universe is like 3 seats in front of you and things are pretty good. You're well above this earth and you're in very, very good hands. So it was very lovely. And I remember when we arrived in Mumbai, we were in the airport and some Hare Krishna girl came up and she had some pictures of Krishna. And we were all just so floored by having spent that time with Swami. Some of the young devotees were laughing and they were just didn't know what to do with the energy. And she sort of looked at all the people, and she said, are they on LSD? And so I told her, you could say we just saw Krishna. And so it was a very, very sweet kind of time like that. In the old days, there were so few people there and there was so little technology there that if you had a camera, even like a little brownie camera, which my friend had, you were allowed to walk behind Swami and take pictures of him as he walked through darshan. And so my friend had this little brownie camera. But this being India, it was very hard to get film. It was almost impossible to get film, 1971. But that didn't stop him. He wanted to take his chance. So he would follow behind Swami and every once in a while he'd be clicking his camera just so he had this chance to be close to Swami. And everyone had their own little angle, how they were going to try and be close to Swami, how they were going to do. And Swami would play a little game with each person. There'd be a little hide and seek back and forth. And this was part of the charm of the whole being there. And I remember one time we were in the garden in Whitefield, and one of the young ladies from America had just had a baby. And so there was a baby naming, and Swami named her Prema. And he also brought out a whole bunch of baby clothes. And so the young women were all oohing and aahing, and Swami's making oohing and aahing. And he's just like, what they say about when he says, when I'm with 10 men, I'm a man. When I'm with 10 women, I'm a woman. And it was one of those cases where he was sort of like running this baby shower. And he was just totally the the mother and the friend, and looking out for everything, and also, you know, making these very light sort of cooing noises and things like that. It was very, very lovely. And Swami was at home everywhere in the world, because everywhere in the world was part of him. So at one time we went in a car, followed him to this village where they were doing some kind of ceremony, and nothing was in English because we had no idea, and we had no idea how we really got there. But fortunately, we were able to see him. And actually what happened was my wife and I were at Darshan, and Swami went out to go to some village, and we went right out the gate, and there was a new lady there. She had no idea really why she was even there, you know, how Swami had called her there, but she was there with a car. And so immediately we introduced ourselves and said, we got in her car and said, okay, follow him. So this was her first experience of Swami, was in this little village. And in this village, there was the head chief, and there were all the people, the heads of the different families, and there were about 100 people. And they were all they were trying to do some religious ritual, but they really didn't know how to do it. And they really weren't sure. And the great king, Sathya Sai, had arrived, and they didn't know what to do with it. But Sathya Sai knew every one of them. And he knew exactly, you know, okay, you to go over here. Now you do this. Now this happens over here. Now we're going to do this. Boom, 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 boom. And he, you know, smiled at this person and spoke to this person and chided that person. And the whole thing was there for about 15 minutes. And he basically interacted with each of the 100 people. So it was really quite sweet to be allowed to be part of this. And sometimes he would, one time with my wife, she used to have a very high-pitched voice. And so he had done something. She says, oh, thank you, Swami, something like that. And he sort of says back, no mention, sir, which was his usual way of saying you're welcome. And so he would play. He's a great player. And so within that, so we have had these chances, either personally or through others. And basically, there are infinite number of interactions with Swami. And it's just for us to sort of dig them out, find ones that make sense to us and that have an appeal to us and speak to our heart. And there are so many books and so many videos and so many this and so many that you can dig, or what I call data mining. You can sort of find what it is, the nuggets that make the most sense for you. You know, you don't have to try and eat the whole thing, but you just have to find what it is that moves you and work on that. And I like to tell this banana story. How many have heard this banana story that I've told? Okay, so well, let's try this out. So my closest high school friend finally came to see Swami. When I first got to see Swami, I wrote back to my hometown and to many people saying, this is really earth-shattering. You absolutely must come to see Sathya Sai. And a few people did. My sister did, my brother-in-law did, and my best friend eventually came. And this was the beginning of January of '72. And he had really no idea what he was getting himself into. And as a matter of fact, I really, even after being there 9 months, really wasn't totally sure exactly what I had gotten myself into. I knew that Swami was something very special and very magnetic, and that I was part of it. And that this was something that all should partake of who could possibly do so. But my friend was having a hard time sort of tuning in. And but fortunately, one night we were invited into the house in Whitefield where Swami was giving bhajans with the students. And Swami was playing kartals, and he was playing them so fast and so brilliantly, you couldn't tell whether he was really good at it or whether it was some kind of divine intervention that he was doing. And the students were singing, and at the end of the evening, Swami gave out a piece of fruit to each person that was there. And so I got my orange, I believe. And my friend was kind of hanging back because he was new and he wasn't really sure what his place in all of this was. And so he was also a college athlete. He had just graduated from college. And he was very, very muscular kind of guy. And so he was sort of hanging back with sort of his muscles and just sort of had his hand out, just a, sort of off to the side of his hip, just sort of, and Swami went by him as though he didn't see him. And then Swami sort of looks out of the side of his eye, you know, like, oh, like I must have forgotten you. And then he sort of, Swami, how he sort of backs up. And he backs up, and as he backs up, he gets very, very muscular. And there's a very muscular Swami next to a very muscular athlete. And they're two guys, and they're not looking directly to each other. They're sort of sidling up to each other like two macho guys. And Swami takes a banana in his hand, and he flips it up. You know, it's how small Swami is. He sort of flips the banana. And my friend's hand is like there, and boom, the banana makes this big slap, and it hits in his hand. And so we all go home. And in those days, home were these pump houses in the marigold fields behind the college there. And I didn't see him again till the next morning, just before morning darshan. And, you know, I asked him, I said, that was really quite some night, wasn't it? You know, it was very, very intense. And he said, yeah, the energy was so intense, he stayed up all night. But of course, after he ate the banana, he ate the peel too. So I tell people you don't have to eat the whole thing. This is, but the fact that it was from Swami and that this was this unusual energy, he just ate the whole thing. And it is quite a thing. So I also wanted to talk about what I think of as divine existentialism. Swami says, being is lost in becoming. And I think, of course, that's a very, I think that should be very apt for Hollywood. People come there to be someone different, and or to be someone famous, or to become something. And in a sense, as we become something, like I'm a male, or I'm 72, or I have a family, or I'm an American, or I'm this, or I'm that. Those are all becoming. Those are all, or I have this profession. Those are all things that we add on. But underneath, there's the being, and Swami calls it the divine being. And we have to get back to that divine being. And ideally, we keep the role, the mask of God that we're playing, this role that we're playing. But within it, the being, the foundation of us is glowing and bright and spills over to others. And it's totally delightful. And I was thinking about this because thinking about what happened one time in Puttaparthi, up near the old General Hospital. Someone was showing me some pictures, and I think they had just traveled around India. And I saw this picture and I said, wow, this is really beautiful. Where is this? And the person pointed out that it was a picture of exactly where we were standing right at that moment. I hadn't tuned in that this was the beautiful spot that we were in, you know, and you remember it looks across the valley to the mountains and the riverbeds and things like that. And, but it's like that. Our being is lost in becoming. Sometimes we're always looking for the next thing. I also wanted to say that, you know, in Hollywood tough guy movies, they say things like, this time it's personal, you know, like we're going to fight this out. This time it's personal. But I think it applies to our situation. In the Sattvic world, in the divine world, this time it's personal. In the past, you know, religion and spirituality and has been sort of a lot under the dictate of culture and form and structure. And now this whole world there is structure, and we can adopt structure, and we can take structure, and we can use structure, but we're not confined by that structure. It's really our personal relationship with Swami that's the important thing. And this is the thing that we most want to keep in mind as we get back to that being, our divine self. And so how do we make this personal connection with Swami? And one way is to become a friend of God. There's not just a sort of a distant onlooker, but a real friend of God, and to keep God with us so that we're speaking to God day and night. God's much more interesting person to be speaking to than anyone else. And this God can really understand and really knows better. And everything else seems pretty fluffy and gossipy compared to this. This is the real thing. This is where we get a chance to say who we are. It's like we're telling ourselves who we are. And this is, I once mentioned that I had an interest in opera for a couple of years. And it was just a sort of a passing fancy. But during that time period, Swami appeared in a dream and he sang an opera to me. And it was quite lush and quite beautiful and quite moving. And when I woke up, all I could remember were sort of the last lines, which were something like "tua qua, tua qua." And I'm not much of a linguist, and in sort of a mashup, you might say, of French, Italian, and Latin, "tua qua" translates to "tell me who you are. Who are you? Who are you?" And I've told this story before, but you know how Swami looks out onto the audience when he's speaking, and he'll answer this person's concerns and speak in a metaphor for this person and chide this person and encourage this person without usually naming it. So one time I was there for a speech and it wasn't translated. So I instead of being confused by the translation and trying to, process all of these intense, deep thoughts all at once, and it's very difficult. Instead, I was just there basking, and underneath my long kurta, I had a japa mala, and I'm just saying my mantra, and I'm looking at Swami, excuse me, and I'm about 10 rows away. And I'm feeling really good. I'm feeling, what a good boy am I. And then right in the middle, he sort of looks at me very intensely, and he says a couple of sentences very quickly in Telugu. And so I asked the fellow next to me, what did he say? He said, "You can do japa all your life, but unless you inquire who you are, it will come to nothing." So he can sort of, he'll send out those sort of knockout punches. But it's, all of these there are personal things in there. And if you look through Sathya Sai Speaks, you'll see things there that really speak to you. And ideally, Swami said, you don't have to memorize the Gita or whatever. You can, if you are close enough to God, he'll sing you your own Gita. And I think that's something that we should all strive for. We should be on the lookout. We should be talking to God and hoping that we hear what God has to say to us. So I think, why don't I try some questions now? If there are any, or otherwise I'll just plow ahead.
Well, let's come on now, folks. You got an opportunity to ask Phil some questions. He's been with Swami since 1970. So here's a one.
I have a question. Gopal here. Hello?
Go ahead, Gopal.
Hello, sir. So I'm just curious. You said that what you just said, your last last sentence, that Swami said, you can do all the japa you want. It doesn't mean anything until you discover you are. So my question, you have so much experience with Swami. Where do you feel you are in your life as discovering yourself?
Long way to go. But, on that, it doesn't mean that japa is worthless. It's, as a matter of fact, quite the opposite. And there's some, some situations, Swami will say, do japa, this is your sadhana. And he'll often say, generally, this is the sadhana to do for the Kali Yuga. But sometimes he'll also say to people who have really done various sadhanas and things like that, he'll say, okay, now the important thing is who you are. And that says to those people, 80% of sadhana is inquiring who you are. And so the japa and things like that, they set you up to be close to Swami, to be close, to think about him in all cases, in all situations, and everything like that. And so it all leads to who you are. You are going to have to say who you are, but to give your mind, that wild elephant of a mind, something to hold on to. So it doesn't go crazy. It doesn't go stamping off into the bushes or off a cliff or something like that. It gives us something to hold on to so we can focus on the one. And then when you inquire who you are, it becomes much, much easier.
Thank you.
Who's next? Now's your chance.
There's any practice that you're familiar with regarding the direct inquiry?
I sometimes would do what's sometimes called neti. Are people familiar with that? So it means not this, not that. And so it would mean not this computer, not this suit jacket, not this table, not this conception of myself, not this concern what others think, not this worry about tomorrow, not this worry about yesterday, not this lamp, not this, not this, but what is it? Not this, but there's God, that foundation, that being. That's sort of like a who you are kind of practice, I think. Another one I like is my own version of Purnamida Purnamidam. It goes something like this. This is good, that is good. When the good is taken from the good, only the good remains. Or that is perfect, this is perfect. When the perfect is taken from the perfect, only the perfect remains. And on like that. This is divine, that is divine. And those are kind of things that attract me personally. But each person we have to figure out for ourselves what is it that's attractive. You don't have to do the whole buffet of 8,000 different meditations or things like that. It's a personal interaction with God. So, and it's a personal interaction with ourselves. So you can't really sort of BS yourself in a way, because it's you you're talking to. In the end, am I myself really, or am I just a bunch of pieces, as Swami would say?
I have a question, Phil.
Yeah.
When Swami passed, many of us were heartbroken, and we didn't have him to talk to anymore, or we couldn't see him, and and we all felt very lost. And now many of us are feeling very lost, having so many people sick, and so many people, you wear a mask everywhere you go, and you have to stay alone a lot. So what do you think about this? What's going to happen to us now that Swami's gone, and we can't go to Puja party, and we can't do many of the things that we used to do. It's a terrible time, and we've got leaders that are not good leaders, and we got all kinds of things going on that looking in the world, it looks like a terrible time. I believe Swami said at one point things would be bad, and he even said, but then it'll be too late. Do you recall any phrases like that, or any
I was there for a speech when he said that the world would come to unity in the 2030s. And I don't know what that means, but for me, it means like stay healthy. You want to see what this is about. And but actually, thanks for bringing that up, because I actually had been thinking about speaking about that when Swami left. So this abandonment and leaving is an exile. These are all big religious themes. In a sense, when you're in a spiritual life, you feel a little bit exiled from the world. Like, what am I doing here? Or you've seen that bumper sticker, just visiting from a different planet. And sometimes it feels like that. Mm-hmm. And it goes back, even if you look at the Krishna avatar. So Krishna was with the gopis, and it was incredibly personal and direct. And they had time with Krishna, and they were totally in love with Krishna. And one day Krishna left, and he went off. It was a different part of his life, a different part of his career. And he went off to be a king in Dwarka, which was hundreds of miles away, might as well have been thousands of miles away in those days. And so they were all heartbroken. And over the years, they started to see Krishna everywhere. And so finally, one day, Krishna sent his right-hand man, I forget who it was now. Probably someone can remember the story better than I can. But sent to the gopis, and basically they were unfazed because they saw the bumblebee there, and they were thinking Krishna. They saw the plant there, they were thinking Krishna. And so for them, Krishna was there. Krishna had never left. And so I think that we're in the same situation with Swami. So Swami was doing that even when we were with him. He would say things like, "I'll see you tomorrow," and then he wouldn't see you. Or, sometimes he would be, I like to tell this story. One time, he had promised my wife a robe. And so years later, I said to him, "Oh, Swami, you promised my wife a robe." And he said, promises. And then he sort of goes off. And he was like that. And he could be, as you know, really rough. And sometimes when the situation called for it, there were no social niceties. He was very direct. And so sometimes there was a feeling of exile from him. And, this issue or this theme of exile occurs in religions across history, Hinduism, Christianity, Muslim, Judaism, and I think that this is going to be something that's part of our lives. But probably the most heart-wrenching for me was one time my little son was with us in India, and Swami had us quite at a distance, and things weren't going very well. But they had gone very well the previous year when he was there. And he was just old enough to talk. And he said, because last time Swami said he was going to be with us, but this time I think maybe he forgot. And my heart was just wrenched. I was like, I really had to, keep from crying and things like that. And he did another one time, a very extensive thing that went on for a couple of years. And then finally, when it appeared totally unlikely that it was going to happen, he called us in and did something for us. And I was starting to get teary, and he said, "Swami never disappoints. You're thinking Swami's not going to do, but Swami never disappoints." So we have this tension between the Swami that, suddenly disappears, and the Swami who has made many major promises to us, and we've made many major promises to him. And so this is always a kind of an interesting issue. Have we kept our promises to him? But Swami never disappoints. But Swami never disappoints on a very, very large stage. So for him, life and death they're like nothing. And I had a dream that was very important to me personally, in which I was again with another high school friend. And quite often in regular life, when things would go badly for me, I would say something in my mind like, "Oh, nothing can save me," which is kind of a stupid thing to say, particularly for a devotee. but it was just one of those sort of background chat things, sort of negative cognitions that sometimes we run on ourselves. And it would just pop up every once in a while. And I think maybe Swami got tired of hearing that. So he appears in the dream to my friend and I, and we're both crying because he says, there's nothing that can save you. And we're like just totally devastated. Then he says, but there's nothing that can hurt you. And I woke up and was thinking and on that, what does that mean? And the meaning that I got was that old age, sickness, death, that can't hurt you because you're really the Atma. You're really the soul. You're really the spirit. And when you're really the spirit, you're close to God. And when you're close to God, God never disappoints because we are spirit. And, we're careful because Swami told us to be careful. And so hopefully for most of us, we'll do a little bit better than average in terms of avoiding, the stings and arrows of everyday life. But for sure, we're going to die, and sometimes it's going to be messy. That just comes with being human. So within that, where was I going with this? I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're in exile, but on the other hand, what's really important is God here now. I think we really have to ask that to ourselves pretty much all the time. Is God here? Is God here or not? It's a yes or no question. If God's not here, well, that's kind of tough. And that's rough. And, we're back to the boring life. But if God is here, then something special. We're our real selves. We're really here. We're really here. You know how most of life is like a sort of an old TV show? It's blah, 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 finished another season, blah, 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 blah. But when you're with Swami, it's not like that at all. When you're there with him in person, it's like, ooh, ooh, anything could happen now. And all eyes are on him. And God is here. God is definitely here. And it's a mystery what's happened and what's going to happen. And we should be like that. We should be like that. If for us to finish our path, I think God has to be here. In other words, God obviously is here, but it has to be obvious to us in day-to-day life. I don't know if I got off on a tangent there or not. Okay. Other question.
Next question. Martin, did you have a question? Felt like Martin wanted to ask something. He was trying
I have one, Mark.
Oh, Didier, yes, go ahead, Didier.
Yeah, so I wanted to know if it's everything is about focusing, because it seems like when we focus on God, miracle happen or we feel his presence. But if we're deluded in the world, it's just concept.
Yeah, there's quite a difference between our concepts of God and our experiencing of God. And they both have their place. Concepts of God are kind of fun to play with. They're like little bubbles, like boom, here's a concept of God, and this person has a different concept of God. But what is our real connection to God? And as Swami says, if you have a connection to God, there are certain ways of noticing it. One is you tend to speak a little more sweetly. You tend to be a little bit more fraternal to people. You tend to be a little bit more open-hearted. You tend to be a little bit more in love with God, in love with life, I'd say. In terms of love with life, that's not like grab all the gusto you can kind of life, but in other words, that being life. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. What did it? Okay, good. Okay.
Okay, who else? Now's your chance. You'll think of questions tomorrow and wish you had asked them.
Hi, Phil. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how these experiences have worked their way into your interactions in work and family and relationships.
Yes. I'm a psychologist, and obviously it sort of permeates a lot of things that I think of, and I'm very happy that psychology these days is very open to Eastern kind of concepts. And so I sort of keep that in the back of the mind. There's very much about a sense of being is very important to the interaction. But I also, before that, I worked on Wall Street for 12 years. And I wrote a chapter about that in the Dharmic Challenge, and about being on Wall Street and sort of the interchange there with people around. And it was very difficult to keep the sense of being a devotee and being there at the same time. And sometimes I used to think, well, I was Swami's man on Wall Street, which wasn't the case. He had a lot of devotees around there. And but it also was a sort of it was an interesting experience. You might say from the sublime to the ridiculous, but it was something, a teaching. It was a great teaching for me. And in relationships, again, very much as Swami would say, it's adjustment sadhana. In other words, we tend to get overly excited about things and worry about things or take offense at things. And one time I was feeling some kind of a difference with my wife, and Swami appeared in a dream and he said, "You're spending too much time looking at your roommate." So he has his own way of, he looks at it sort of like that, like he used to call his mother and father, the houseboy and the house girl and stuff like that. And he used to call some of us who were tall and thin coconut trees. And he had his own way of dealing with things. So, and he used to say some people would get kind of agitated about marriage one way or another. I should get married. I shouldn't get married. And he basically said, if you want to get married, get married. If you don't want to get married, don't get married. And I'm not sure that he says that to all Indian people, but in our group, that was sort of how he approached it. But I'm not sure I answered your question. What, maybe you could narrow it down a bit, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just sort of wanting to get a sense of the way your life maybe has changed and grown with your experiences around Swami and your understanding, over, because I guess, I mean, since the 70s, wow, it's been 50 years, it sounds like.
Well, I'm a slow learner, but I think I do see some change. I'm less bratty than I used to be. The Swami, we had a family interview, and he imitated me as a 5-year-old speaking to my mother, like, "Mommy, mommy, I know, I know." And I was kind of a bratty little kid in a way. And so it sort of undercuts. Swami is very big at undercutting whatever our stance is, whatever our particular personal point of view. When we say, hey, this is me, and this is my world or whatever, he tends to undercut that quite a bit. So that's always a teaching. And yeah, so I think of him because I associate him with so many different things. It helps me in those things. Like I associate him with family. I associate him with work. I associate him with the sky. I associate him with the devotees. I associate him with the ocean. More, and that's obviously just starts. So the more things you associate God or Swami with, it's sort of like you're trying to stitch together a blanket or a cloth. You know, you get one little thing, you get one little piece of sodden, or you get one little Sotwick impulse, or you get one little thing, and you put all of these things together, and gradually they become stronger and stronger. I think that's sort of, hope that was helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Good.
Okay, couple more questions, and we gotta let Phil go to bed. It's 11 o'clock where he is there. So, anybody got another question?
I see you, Joanne. Did you have a question before?
Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yes. Can you hear?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Well, in 1977, I remember you coming up to us and saying, Swami's doing a lot of marriages this summer, and we think maybe he's going to do a double marriage. And so we should get together and get to know each other. and so do you remember that?
The story is true.
Yes. Okay. And so we got called in for an interview, and Swami blessed our marriage and put rings on our fingers. And then we left, but I never found out if he married you and Peg.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yes, that was before. And what happened was he delayed it so much that, yeah, it was kind of an interesting year, that 1977. The word got out that Swami said it was a good year for marriage. And he started off by marrying, having Raja Reddy, his sort of right-hand man, get married, and in February. And then he told Ram Brahman, the head of the Whitefield ashram, that some young Westerners are coming here they want me to do their marriages, and I'm going to do them. And so in July, he did a double wedding with Michelle and Richard Kaplowitz and Vijay and Wes Huffman. And my wife was kind of bridesmaid for that. And then by this time, it's early August. And, we've met Jerry and Joanne also, who are coming from the Tustin group from Elsie, I guess. Mm-hmm. And but my leave was up for my job. And so it was like the very last day, and the day before Swami, we asked him, would you speak to us about it? And he said yes. And so we were right there by the gate at 9 a.m. the next morning in Whitefield. And he comes out with the boys' band, and he was going off to put some jewel in for the foundation of one of the new buildings there. And the boys' band was relatively new, and they were honking away at Bridge Over the River Kwai.
Oh my.
It's very funny, there's Swami, the Lord of the universe, and they go honk, 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 honk. And they went off there, and they came back an hour later. He gave darshan. We're still by the front gate. And he comes back and he says to me, very happy. And he goes in, and we have a 2 o'clock plane to leave the country. So, like, we're hoping he comes out again or something, or we get some word. And so 1 hour goes by, and this is in the hot sun too. And a second hour goes by, and then Bhagavantam's son comes by, and he goes in the gate. And I asked him if he could ask Swami, what we should do. And he came back and he said, Swami says you can stay or go as you like. Which some people could take as an insult. But I knew from things that meant he was giving his okay for us to stay. And so I called New York, and I don't think I called. Making a call those days was too difficult. But I managed to squeeze out a few more days of leave. And we canceled the flight. And at 2 o'clock, he then hopped in a car and drove to Puttaparthi. So we went to Puttaparthi. 1 day goes by, nothing. 2 days go by, nothing. 3 days go by, nothing. I figure that's it. We have to leave tomorrow morning. It's all done. And so then that afternoon, that's when he called and said, you're thinking Swami disappoints. Swami never disappoints. Oh. And so I said to him, well, will you perform well, and before any of this got into it, he says, have one son, have one son. I'm giving one son, Sai Prasad. And this is, my wife says to him, well, should we get married? And he said, of course. And so I said, well, will you perform the wedding? And he sort of stares off, you know, like he's a sort of innocent villager. And he's sort of like, and he says, he's sort of muttering, and he's sort of like, Friday is a good day. And I was like, what? And I didn't realize what Friday was the next morning. So we came back and he performed the wedding. So it was, that was the deal. So that was August 5th, and we left like 20 minutes afterwards. So that's why you didn't hear too much from us.
Okay, okay.
We sort of zipped out and zipped in the car and zipped away like that. Although it took, the Air India flight broke down 3 different times. It took us 60 hours to get back to New York. And by the time I got back to New York, my wife thought I had malaria. I was like shaking, you know, and I had to go right back to work. And anyway, it was all part of the adventure.
Part of the drama, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the next time we saw you was the following year in Udi, where you brought your
That's right.
old, I don't know, 10-day-old infant son. to
He was 6 weeks old then. Yeah.
6 weeks old. Okay,
Yeah, like that.
quite a trip.
Yep. Gene, anything else?
Well, Phil, my daddy always said to leave a party while you're still having a good time.
Okay, good.
So, so we really enjoyed having you, Phil, and we made a recording of this. I hope we have your permission to put this up on YouTube because it's very valuable talk. And
Okay, sort of hold on to it for a little bit. Let me
will.
ponder that.
I'll
See
let
if
you-
I said anything that was way out of hand there.
Okay, yeah. But we really enjoyed having you. Now, I must tell you, you don't have to stay for the rest of the budget. I know it's 11 there, and after 11, you've got to go to bed. So if you want to log off, that'll be just fine. If you want to stay with us, that's fine too.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and may Swami bless you fully and completely. And it was a pleasure for me to be with you and think about Swami and speak about Swami, and just to speak about him, to hear it's coming out of my own mouth. I think, wow, hey, it's Swami. Swami must be here. So thank you. May Swami bless you.
Thank you,
Be
Phil.
well.
Really enjoyed having you. Hope to see you again soon.